The world's always had superpowers, from ancient times till now, starting with the Achaemenids, who turned Iran into a massive empire, to the Romans, who took over half of the known world. Then came the Mongols, who rode their horses all the way to Europe. After that, it was the turn of the Portuguese and the Spanish, who discovered the New World with their ships. And of course, the English built an empire where the sun never set. The Russians also rose to power, especially during the Soviet era. But you know what? None of them stayed a superpower forever. They all peaked at some point and then slowly declined. It's like a cycle. One goes up, another comes down. Now, let's move forward to modern times. Who's the superpower now? Well, obviously, it's America. Sure, some people might say, nah, China's overtaking the US. But if we look at it logically, no country has as much influence globally as America. In every aspect you can think of, military, economy, culture, they're on top. So how did America become so powerful? The story goes back to World War I. Before that, the US was just a regular country, not too weak, not too strong. But World War I changed everything. At the start of the war, America stayed neutral, which boosted its economy because it sold weapons and food to the countries at war, especially the Allies. When the US finally entered the war, its fresh troops tipped the balance in favor of the Allies. After the war, not only had America suffered little damage, but its economy was thriving. Meanwhile, European countries were weakened. That war transformed America from an ordinary player into a major power. But the story didn't end there. World War II came along and changed things again. This time, the US got involved from the beginning. American industries went all out, producing weapons and equipment, which made the economy boom. On top of that, the US launched the Manhattan Project and built the first atomic bomb. When the war ended, the US was the only country with the atomic bomb, and its economy was intact. Europe and Japan were in ruins, but America was ready to rebuild the world. Britain, which had been a superpower, had to pass the crown to the US. Of course, the Soviets were part of the equation, which led to the Cold War. Now that we know how America became a superpower, let's look at how it's maintained that power. One of the main reasons, which people might not always notice, is America's military bases all over the world. If you look at the globe, America has bases in every region you can think of, not just one or two, but hundreds of them spread across the earth. These bases started expanding after World War II, when the US realized that if it wanted to stay a superpower, it had to be present everywhere to stop its enemies before they could act. You should know that America's overseas base building started with the defeated countries of World War II, Germany and Japan, and 5 years later South Korea was added. Today, the largest number of American bases are in these three countries. A lot of these bases are hidden, not that they're some secret base in a classified location, but they're just not officially listed anywhere. Because of that, even Pentagon staff don't know exactly where all the US bases are, and there's no official count of them. You won't be able to find all of them with any search. So why all the secrecy? One main reason is that America doesn't want everyone to know exactly where its influence lies. That's why an American author named David Vine in the early 2000s took on the task of identifying all US military bases worldwide. Guess how many bases he found after completing his research? About 800 in more than 70 different countries. That's an unbelievable number for one country. And this is just the bases he was able to find. Who knows? The real number could be much higher. David Vine, after gathering this data, wrote a book about it, Base Nation. However, US military bases around the world are constantly changing. For example, in Afghanistan, they had more than 10 bases, but packed up and left. In Iraq, they had 6 or 7, but now only 3 remain, and even those are about to be closed. The 3 countries with the most US bases, as we said, are the World War II losers and South Korea. Now, do you think America has 10 bases in Germany? 25 or 50? Go higher. It has 119 bases there. How about Japan? Same as Germany, more than 120. And in South Korea, or as some call it, the Republic of Samsung, which isn't a big country, there are around 90 bases. By the way, if you're wondering why we call it the Republic of Samsung, check out this video on things. Anyway, David Vine also says that these 800 bases aren't the whole picture. There are many bases worldwide that no one knows are even American. He says there are over 100 such unnamed and untraceable bases. Many US bases are built on islands to avoid being on anyone's soil, one of the largest being Diego Garcia. Diego Garcia is located in the middle of the Indian Ocean and houses about 5,000 personnel who live and work there. All these bases you see around the world come in different sizes, big and small, but they all have a standard airstrip. They store tons of military equipment and have plenty of personnel. But here's something you should know. Not all US military bases necessarily have fighter jets or helicopters, as each base is built with a specific purpose, but it's safe to say that many of them definitely have UAVs. You know what's really interesting about these military bases? If you go there as a soldier, officer, pilot, or whatever, it's like you've just stepped into America. It doesn't matter if the base is in Syria, Qatar, Guam, or Germany. Inside, it's all America. First off, if the base is big, there are tons of American-style houses and apartments where the staff and their families live. Even if the base is smaller, there are still some houses. Once you step out of these houses, it feels like you're in the streets of an American city. There's McDonald's, the same supermarkets as in the US, and all kinds of shops with the same prices as back home. Some of the bigger ones even have schools, cinemas, and stuff like that. Even the currency is dollars. So, America really leaves nothing out when it comes to facilities and culture. The biggest and most equipped US military base outside of America is Camp Humphreys in South Korea. This base is 3,400 hectares. That's as big as Venice, Italy. Can you guess how many people live there? 10,000? 15,000? Nope, more than 40,000 personnel and their families live there. It's practically its own city, with all the amenities a city would have. And in terms of equipment, it's got everything you can think of. Runways for planes and helicopters, all kinds of fighter jets and ground equipment. Basically, America brought a bunch of their good stuff there. Looking at US military bases around the world, they're kind of like a moving chart. They shut one down somewhere, open another somewhere else. You never know where they'll go next or where they'll settle. Now, what about other countries, like China, Russia, or others? If you Google list of countries with overseas military bases, you'll see the Wikipedia page pop up. China has 4 foreign bases in Cuba, Djibouti, Tajikistan, and Cambodia. Russia has bases in 14 countries, and here's the list. The huge difference shows just how far ahead the US is compared to other powers, and it looks like no one's catching up anytime soon. If you're curious to see the full list, I've put the link in the description, so you can check out all the countries with foreign bases. It's not just the bases either. US aircraft carriers, each like a floating base, can be found in all the world's seas and oceans. These carriers are like mobile bases. Each one can carry hundreds of planes and thousands of military personnel. So even in places where the US doesn't have land bases, they can still be present with these carriers. Now, how much do these bases cost? All the expenses are part of the US military budget, which is close to $1 trillion a year. Yep, the US spends nearly $1 trillion a year on its military and global power. That's a mind-blowing amount. No other country can even dream of spending that much on its military. If any country wants to compete with the US and become a superpower, the first thing they need is that kind of money, $1 trillion a year. And they've got to be willing to spend it on their military. Do you know what $1 trillion is? That's the total GDP of a pretty large country, like Turkey. If Turkey wanted to take the US's place, it'd have to spend its entire year's income on its military just to keep up with the US. And people would be left with nothing but bread and water. Well, that's just a joke, but no country could spend its entire income on the military. Even China, which is the second largest economy in the world after the US, with a GDP of $18 trillion, only spends about $230 billion a year on its military because, with such a large population, it can't afford to spend more. Some Americans, like people in other countries, aren't fans of these US military bases. They say their tax money is being spent in other countries, and sometimes they even protest. Europeans also don't like how much influence the US has globally. The US's influence in Europe is also huge, which is why Europeans kind of have a grudge against America and say the US has started wars in Europe. This has become even more of an issue since the Ukraine war, with some saying the US military presence in Europe provoked Russia. Regardless of what people think about the US, they need to realize that if a country wants to stay a superpower, it has to pay the price. Influence comes at a cost. For example, the US pours billions of dollars into different countries every year. Pakistan gets 2 or 3 billion a year, Egypt too, and Israel even more. Now, Ukraine has been added to the list. These aren't just handouts, they're a kind of political investment. The US buys loyalty with this money. All these countries need to be able to stand on their own to stay under US influence. If they can't stand, they need financial help, or they might collapse, and their politics could change, which could put US influence in that region at risk. This is the same policy Britain followed during its empire days. They did the same thing, using the resources of one place themselves stay afloat. Who do you think will be the next superpower? Will the US continue as the dominant force, or will someone else take its place?